Okay, people, we are live. We are live. We're in the building. Welcome to Esoteric Daydreams, the awakening, right? Where if you thought the nightmare was scary, wait till you wake up from the daydream. Right? Let me just take two more puffs. And then we can get into this show here. Like while we waiting, don't forget to hit the like, the subscribe, and the notification bell. So you could be notified whenever we go live or upload new content like now. All right. And don't forget to check out my book, Street Skelzy, Knock 'em Out the Box, right? Which is about two brothers on opposite sides of the law who must team up in order to find their father's killer or killer. Just a murder mystery that takes place in the New York tri-state area about, a prominent businessman who was killed, mysteriously, and there was no clues until some guys wound up popping up in a strip club with his ring on, which drew the attention of the owner, who was one of his best friends. And from there, he basically lets the son know, and this is where the journey takes off for the hunt for the killer. All right. It also got my book, Freemasonry and Yanni Worship, the second killing of Jesus, which is also available on Amazon. And it's just basically a lot of this information condensed. But the heads up, I have roughly like 3 more books on the subject, right? But in different areas and approaches and understanding historically what is taking place here. So that those will be coming in the near future. Now, as far as this show is concerned, we will be discussing the art of Freemasonry, right? Which we know the Freemason, now we can look, in history and pinpoint an identity of the Freemason, and we'll call them the Sophist, right? And so, and when we study the Sophists, we understand the art of rhetoric, right? So we will be discussing this art of rhetoric, right? Let's get into this right here, people. Right now, some of these pictures are not necessarily meant to be offensive, right? Even though the subject matter would have a more negative connotation than a positive one, there is forms of positivity that can come out of it. Me being able to understand what was being taken place in society with this game that's being played on us came from a lot of those rhetorics. Even though it was BS, it still led me in a direction to finding the truth, in the finding out that this is, from this rhetoric, I found out that there could be no lie without truth attached to it, right? So anything that doesn't have truth in it and you're telling this story is just that. It's a fable. It's a tale, right? Now, you can lie to the people, right? And even fables and all of that have truth. I mean, I really don't know too many things that that's out here that is not linked, to something else and know something else. Even if you're linking it to another story, those stories are still connected to a truth, right? So, let's get into this, right? What is rhetoric? The slick talking charlatan, right? And so, like I said, I made these slides. There's a whole bunch of pictures, and I want you to really absorb, everything, not just what is being said, but what you're seeing, and calculate what is being said here about rhetoric, and have you 9 times out of 10 have been a victim of this system. So this is for those wanting to know how to identify it, to repel it, right? So, as you see, I put up these pictures. Now, what I was doing, wait, let me show you Kamal Harris over there. What I was doing was linking these old movies, and basically, connecting them to the people and whatnot. It was just being funny. Anyway, let's go. Okay. The con men, right? Rhetoric is an art of persuasion. It is one of 3 ancient arts of discourse, trivium, along with grammar and logic or dialect. Right? As an academic discipline within the humanities, rhetoric aims to study the techniques that speakers or writers use to inform, persuade, and maneuver. Maneuver their audience. So not only are you persuading them, after you persuade them, now you can move them, right? Well, that says motivate, actually. I'm sorry. It's the way I made it. So anyway, same difference. Rhetoric also provides, right, heuristic for understanding, discovering, and developing arguments for situations, just situations in general, right? So this is how you can start finding these cult leaders, right? As you see your boy here, this is polite. I won't put the brother in front of it, right? Can't game a gamer. Aristotle defines rhetoric as a faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. And since mastery of the art, keyword, was necessary for a victory in a case of law, for passing of proposals in the assembly, or for fame as a speaker in civic ceremonies, right? One of these guys. He called it a combination of science, of logic, and of the ethical branch of politics. Aristotle also identified 3 persuasive audience appeals: logos, pathos, and ethos. The 5 canons of rhetoric, or phases of development or persuasive speech, were first codified in classical Rome, which is invention, argument, style, memory, and delivery. And we're gonna address how with this art, and how they learned it from the Egyptians, right? Because when you hear them say, "Oh, they got it from Egypt," this is what they're basically referring to be honest with you. In many cases, not in everything, but in the long haul, when we're talking about Freemasonry. Right? From ancient Greece to the late 19th century, rhetoric played a central role in Western education and training orators, lawyers, counselors, historians, statesmen, and poets. Why? Because the devil is in the details. If the devil is allowed to educate these people, right, then he's also allowed to use the rhetoric himself. He's teaching rhetoric while installing the rhetoric into the people that he is teaching. Right, so the devil is in the details. The devil is all in there. Hold on, let me just put up one thing here for 1 second. All right. All right. Let me see. My fault. This is okay. Refresh. All right. Point you down. So I'm just making sure that the what's the name is up. So if you come in and you want to comment, you know it'll be there for you. All right. All right. So let's go. It goes mental parasites. What are these mental parasites and what do they do? You see, scholars have debated the scope of rhetoric since the ancient times, although some have limited rhetoric to the specific realm of political discourse. To many modern scholars, it encompasses every aspect of culture. Every aspect of culture. Contemporary studies of rhetoric addresses a much more diverse range of domains than was the case in ancient times. While classical rhetoric trained speakers to be effective persuaders in public forums and in institutions such as courtrooms and assemblies, contemporary rhetoric investigates human discourse writ large. Right? Rhetoricians have studied the discourses of a wide variety of domains, including the natural and social sciences, fine arts, religions, journalism, digital media, fiction, history, cartograph, and architecture, along with the more traditional domains of political and of politics and the law. All right. Your thoughts or theirs? Because the ancient Greeks valued public political participation, rhetoric engaged in an important curriculum of those desiring to influence politics. Rhetoric is still associated with its political origins. However, the original instructors of Western speech, the sophists, dispute this limited view of rhetoric. According to sophists like Gorgias, a successful rhetorician could speak convincingly on topics in any field, regardless of his experience in that field. This suggests rhetoric could be a means of communicating any expertise, not just politics. In this encomium of Helen, Gorgias even applied rhetoric to fiction by seeking, for his amusement, to prove the blamelessness of the mystical Helen of Troy and starting the Trojan War. Right? It's all lies. Plato defined the scope of rhetoric according to his negative opinion of the art. He criticized the sophists for using rhetoric to deceive rather than to discover truth. In Gorgias, one of the Socratic dialogues, Plato defined rhetoric as the persuasion of ignorant masses within the courts and assemblies. Rhetoric, in Plato's opinion, is merely a form of flattery and functions similarly to culinary arts, which masks the undesirable of unhealthy foods by making it taste good. Plato considered any speech of lengthy prose aimed at flattery as within the scope of rhetoric. Some scholars, however, contend the idea that Plato despised rhetoric and instead viewed his dialogues as a dramatization of complex rhetorical principles. Right? So here's the thing. Right? This is why you see me use Noble Drew Ali and Polite, and you'll see me use these other peoples, because as we look into this, we should be able to start seeing, right, what this rhetoric is, these liars, and then we'll be able to spot them out in, the free world, because we'll understand how this system works. That's my objective, to teach you how it works so you will not be a victim, right, of this mental crime, the beating of the head, the beating of the mental, the crime you can't see, right? So, Aristotle both redeemed rhetoric. Now, mind you, Aristotle is Plato's student, but Plato was Socrates' student, right? So, hold on a minute here. Aristotle both redeemed rhetoric from his teacher and narrowed its focus by defining three genres of rhetoric: deliberative, forensic, and judicial, and epidemic, right? Yet, even as he provided order to existing rhetorical theories, Aristotle generalized the definition of rhetoric to be the ability to identify the appropriate means of persuasion in a given situation. This made rhetoric applicable to all fields, not just politics. Aristotle viewed the etheme. Now, we did a show on etheme, breaking down, and that's where the word meme comes from, right? Based upon logic, especially based upon syllogisms, as the basis of rhetoric. However, since under his definition, rhetoric would include what is this? Torture. So when we see, right, these cults and, they, getting to the children, doing, sexual acts and all of that, understand that this is a part of that system, right? These are the things that they do in order to bring about this mindset, right? In the sense that the practice of torture is a form of persuasion or coercion. It is clear that rhetoric cannot be viewed only in academic terms, right? This is how you justify the lie. So we understand now that, right, inside these cults, when they're doing these type of things, right, they're doing it, to shift the mindset into a certain direction. Right. Aristotle also outlined generic constraints that focused on rhetorical art squarely within the domain of public political practice. He restricted rhetoric to the domain of the contingent or probable. those matters that omit multiple legitimate opinions or arguments. Since the time of Aristotle, logic has changed. For example, model logic has undergone a major development that also modifies rhetoric. So as time goes on, rhetoric is updated, right? And you'll know that by even when you go to the lodge, the Grand Lodge, and they keep the rituals, right? So they know the old rituals, so they won't go backwards as they push people forward in the rhetoric. You know what I'm saying? So they build an argument, then they start closing off those arguments to introduce new ones as the generations go forward. Right? The contemporary neo-Aristotelian and neo-Sophic positions on rhetoric mirror the division between the Sophist and Aristotle. Neo-Aristotelians generally study rhetoric as political discourse, while the neo-Sophic view contends that rhetoric cannot be so limited. Rhetorical scholar Michael Leff characterizes the conflict between these positions as viewing rhetoric as a thing contained versus a container. So basically rhetoric is something you use, right? It's held into something that you're holding. So you utilize rhetoric instead of it just being something that's out there, like, like the free world, right? The world is out there, oxygen, and these things are holding you in place. So it's not oxygen, right? Allowing you to motivate and move around, because wherever oxygen is, you're limited to, right? So you're in the field of oxygen versus holding on, to water or something like that. It's the best way I can try to describe it, right? They ain't container, right? The neo-Aristotelian views threaten the study of rhetoric by restraining it in such a limited field, ignoring many critical applications of rhetorical theory, criticism, and practice. Simultaneously, the neo-sophists threaten to expand rhetoric beyond a point of coherent rhetorical value. So what does the sophists do? Threaten to expand rhetoric beyond the point of coherent, of something that you can even understand, right? Because they're taking it beyond. And this is how you move society, because once you understand the game, you'll understand how it's basically like overloading a lot of people's comprehension level, right? It's attacking the comprehension and it's overloading it with random spurts of information to make it seem believable. The narrative, like, so you're telling the story, right? You're building this narrative, but you're building the narrative off of these things that don't necessarily coincide, but the way you tell it, it coincides. Wait, hold on a minute here. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. In more recent years, people studying rhetoric have tended to enlarge its object domain beyond speech. Kenneth Burke associated humans use rhetoric to resolve conflict by identified shared characteristics and interest in symbols. So we can look in the background, we can see these shared interests, the blackness, right? The Egyptness and the symbols and all of that, to bring these people in to a system, right? People engage in identification, either to assert themselves or another to a group. Moors, Nubians, NOI, right? This identification of rhetoric as identifications broadens the scope from strategic to overt political persuasion, right? So it goes from just being strategic to an overt, like things that you don't see, persuasion, to a more implicit tactic of identification found in an immense range of sources. So you can use all of these different things right around you to build this world. Among many scholars who have proposed Burke's line of thought, James Boyd White sees rhetoric as a broadening domain of social experience, and in his notion of constructive rhetoric influenced by theories of social construction, right, which I did a whole series on, and this is how you know that I'm breaking down this system for you, right? White argued that culture is reconstituted through language. Just as language influences people, people influence language. Language is socially constructed. Right, so when we say, "Oh, black," and they tell you it's a social construct, they're using that to also shift you again into a new direction. So either way, if you follow that path, right, one, you were born in, right, so you're not necessarily a sheep. You're just like, okay, that's the title, Now the other one is proving that they can move you by getting you not to do that and identifying with new things, as you hear with the ADOS and these people, we're the natives, and that's why I put this this picture in the background to show you, okay, these are the natives. I don't think you were the same people, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, and mind you, this is a camera, that might have been, the focus and all of that stuff. What do you call it? The 1010 and all of those type of things. Anyway, social construct, and dependent on meanings people attach to it, because language is not rigid and changes depending on the situation. The very usage of language is rhetorical. An author, White would say, is always trying to construct a new world and persuading his or her reader to share that world within the text. This is the main objective of writing, right? An author writes, this is what White says, an author, White would say, is always trying to construct a new world and persuading his or her readers to share that world within the text. You see what I'm saying? So with that, we can understand, right, this magic that's being played on you. But well, I don't know if you get to understand it completely until we break down, how it works out in the public. This is the shows that I've done, as you can see, 2 hours, to basically all together, roughly like 5 hours of information there on social construct, Freemasonry, right? People engage in rhetoric anytime they speak or produce meaning, even in the field of science, via practices which were once viewed as being merely an objective testing and reporting of knowledge. Scientists persuade their audience to accept their findings by sufficiently demonstrating that their study or experiment was conducted reliably and resulted in significant evidence to support their conclusion. Like, this is what I'm doing, right? This is my research, and I'm showing through all of these different variables this system, and showing that yes, I do know how it works, right? A vast scope of rhetoric is difficult to define. Political discourse remains the dynamic example for studying and theorizing specific techniques and concepts of persuasion or rhetoric, right? Throughout European history, rhetoric meant persuasion in public and political settings, such as assemblies and courts, because of its association with democratic institutions. Rhetoric is commonly said to flourish in open, democratic societies with rights of free speech, free assembly, and political infringements for some position of some portion of the population, just some portion, not the whole. Keep that in mind, right? Those who classify rhetoric as a what? Civic art, keyword art, right? Believe that rhetoric has the power to shape communities, form the character of citizens, and greatly affect civil life. Did you hear what that said? Those who classify rhetoric as a civil art, myself, believe that rhetoric has the power to shape communities. I watch it being done, form the character of citizens. We see that, right? And greatly affect civic life. Right? Rhetoric was viewed as a civic art by several of the ancient philosophers. Aristotle and Socrates were two of the first to see rhetoric in this light. In Antidotes, illicit states, we have come together and founded cities and made laws and invented arts. And generally speaking, there is no institution devised by man which the power of speech has not helped us to establish. That's why when we think about the Bible, right, and it says, in the beginning, was the word, right? Established with the word, which with this statement, he argues that rhetoric is the fundamental part of civic life in every society, and that it has been necessary in the foundation of all aspects of society. He further argued against the sophists that rhetoric, although it cannot be taught to just anyone, this system cannot not anyone can just learn it, is capable of shaping the character of man. So even if, I can't, you are not, it's like philosophy. You might think philosophy is about just asking these questions. That's not philosophy. That's just a step in the direction of philosophy. It's asking a question, and then it's finding out if what you're asking is correct. So you would have to go and do your studies, right? So it's not asking a question, it's asking a question and then finding out if what you're asking is correct. And that's philosophy, right? And you do that through psychology, right? So you can't do one without the other. Rhetoric, although cannot shape man. He writes, I do think that the study of political discourse can help more than any other thing to stimulate and form such qualities of character. Aristotle's writing several years after elucidates, supporting many of his arguments, and argued for rhetoric as a civic art. Right. And so when we think about, the age of enlightenment and those type of things, we should be able, right? And I did the whole shows on that. And when we look at, the York right and the Scottish right and these symbols, we should be able to start to understand what is taking place. These people who have mastered this craft. Right? Persuasion. The action or fact of persuading someone or of being persuaded to do, or keyword, believe something. Right? To believe. Remember, believe is not an actual fact. So to convince somebody is something that is not an actual fact, and they take it and run with it as if it's a fact, that's persuasion. A belief or set of beliefs, especially religious or political ones. So religious or political, what they always say. Two things you should never discuss: religion or politics. And it's funny, here's where, persuasion lies in. A group or sect of holdings a particular religious belief. Right? Any group or type of persons or things linked by a specific characteristic, quality, or attribute. Right, so we understand, persuasion. Right, in the words of Aristotle, in the rhetoric is the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. According to Aristotle, the art of persuasion, art, keyword, could be used in public settings in three different ways. A member of the assembly decides about future events. A journeyman about past events. While those, and remember, journeyman, while those who merely decide on the orator's skill are observers. From this, it follows that there are three divisions of oratory: political, forensic, and the ceremonial oratory of display. And we'll be getting into that, right? Because here's one of your orators, right? Eugene Graver, in his critique of Aristotle's rhetoric, confirms that Aristotle views rhetoric as a civic art. Graver's writer's rhetoric articulates a civic art of rhetoric combining the almost incompatible properties of techne and appropriateness of civicness of civilians. Each of Aristotle's divisions play a role in civic life and can be used in a different way to affect the polis. Right? So this is you can use this, and how you use it can shift the people. Right? Integration into a burning house. Right? This is by Martin Luther King. Right? Dr. King famously said, "I fear that I have integrated my people into a burning house." He realized that fighting for integration and civil rights had led African Americans into a society that was still deeply divided and unjust. So they taught him this rhetoric, gave him the back end for him to be the shepherd, right? But he was being used, right? And after he realized, that he was being used, it cost him his life, right? But at least he did get a chance to inform the people in whatever way that he could, that he realized that, they basically, used him to mislead his people. Right? Because rhetoric is a public art capable of shaping opinions, some of the ancients, including Plato, found fault in it. They claimed that while it could be used to improve civic life, it could be used just as easily to deceive or manipulate. The masses were incapable of analyzing or deciding anything on their own and would therefore be swayed by the most persuasive speeches. Thus, civic life could be controlled by whoever could deliver the best speech. Plato explored the problematic moral status of rhetoric twice, and Gorgias and Phidias, right? A dialogue best known as its contemporary on love, right? But you see, the key thing is just saying that, right? The masses were incapable of analyzing or deciding anything on their own, right? And would therefore be swayed by the most persuasive speeches. Right, so when we watching, Sinetta and these shows, we have to keep in mind what is taking place here, right? What is this system that is taking place? Right. The modern works continue to support the claim that ancients that rhetoric is an art capable of influencing civic life. In political style, Robert Hermian claims that questions of freedom, equality, and justice often are raised and addressed through performances ranging from debates to demonstrations without loss of moral content. That's why you see Nation of Islam is, you know what I'm saying there, right? Goes James Boyd White argues that rhetoric is capable not only of addressing issues of political interest, but that it can influence culture. In his book, When Words Lose Meaning, he argues that words of persuasion and identification define communities and civic life. He states that words produce the methods by which culture is maintained, civilized, and transformed. So even inside of the rhetoric that is being promoted by these people, you run across, other things that you go, wait a minute. This is why we haven't gone anywhere, because you talk a good one, but anyone who goes outside of that realm, we see what happens to them, right? Malcolm X, Khalid Muhammad, and so on, right? Okay, rhetoric remains relevant as a civic art in speeches as well as in nonverbal forms. Rhetoric continues to be used as a tool. We're talking about Freemasonry here, right? As a tool to influence communities from local to national levels. Right? Political parties employ manipulative rhetoric to advance their party's goals and lobbyist agendas. They use it to portray themselves as champions of compassion, freedom, and culture, all while implementing policies that appear to contradict those claims. It serves as a form of political propaganda presented to sway and maintain political opinions in their favor and garner a positive image, potentially at the expense of suppressing dissent or criticism. An example of this is the government's actions in freezing bank accounts and regulating internet speeches, ostensibly to protect the vulnerable and preserve freedom of expression, despite contradicting values and rights. And these are the political tools. Right. And so we go back to, looking at Sinanetta, it goes, the origin of the rhetoric language begins in ancient Greece. It originally began by a group named the Sophists, who wanted to teach the Athens to speak persuasively to be able to navigate themselves in the courts and Senate. What inspired this form of persuasive speech came about through a new form of government known as democracy that was being experimented with. Keyword in that is experimented. Listen, it was set up, and so when they came down there to try this on the people, they had already set up the system. So, when they saying, oh, these people came down, there was already a system set up, that they had already, put in place. Aristotle, however, believed that these techniques was an art and that persuasive speech could have truth and logic embedded within it. In the end, rhetoric speech still remained popular and was used by many scholars and philosophers. Right. Oh, by the way, don't forget to hit the like, the subscribe, and the notification bell so you can be notified whenever new content is uploaded or we go live just like now. And, if you want to support the channel, because we don't ask for, donations here, but we do, sell books. One of our books is Three Skelzy Knock 'Em Out the Box, which is a novel about two brothers from opposite sides of the law who must team up in order to find their father's killer or killers. It's a fast-paced murder mystery that takes place in the New York tri-state area. Now, I also have another book called Freemasonry and Yanni Worship, The Second Killing of Jesus, which is also available right now on Amazon Books, but I'm not really doing much promotion on it because I want to do a couple of things, some redesigning of the book, basically. But those are the two ways, as well as, you can go to my merch stores. You see my mug right here, right? This is one of my mugs, Old George Gritty. So you can come and check us out, get some merch, support the channel. You know what I'm saying? That's what we say. Support the channel, and it's always much appreciative. Now, let's get into this, right? The study of rhetoric trains students to speak and or write effectively and to critically understand and analyze discourse. It is concerned with how people use symbols, especially language, to reach agreement that permits conditioned effort, that permits coordinated efforts, right? Rhetoric as a course of study has evolved since its ancient beginnings and has adapted to the extinguence of various times, venues, and applications, ranging from architecture again, right, and literature, although the curriculum has transformed in several ways, it has generally emphasized the study of principles and rules on composition as a means of moving audiences, moving the people. This is what this whole thing is, right? So we see, Rakim, what the name of that song is, Move the Crowd. How can I move the crowd, right? A couple of these people is not meant to be negative, but some of them are. This is a negative, right? Rhetoric began as a civic art in ancient Greece, where students were trained to develop tactics of oratorical persuasion, especially in legal disputes. Rhetoric originated in a school of pre-Socratic philosophers known as the Sophists. This is 600 BCE. Dino and Lislian, these are names I'm not going to get right, emerged as major orators during this period. And Elisicate and Gorgiao as prominent teachers. Modern teachers continue to reference these rhetoricians in their works in discussion of classical rhetoric and persuasion. Right now, I wanted you to see that because you could see Nori with his, the seven, right? That's, the God body thing. That's when he's, remember he was beefing with, Gaddafi, and he was like, you go in God body and you come out blind. So he was showing you the seven on this, right? But then we go to him, throw in the Masonic symbol, and we can associate this with him. Remember, he used to say Beelzebub, right? Beelzebub, but really what he was doing was saying Beelzebub, right? So he was already in the system and letting you know he was a part of it. So I should have probably, let me see something. Okay. No, I can't move it. Okay. So rhetoric was taught in universities during the Middle Ages as one of the three original liberal arts of trivium, along with logic and grammar. During the medieval period, political rhetoric declined as Republican orators died out, and the emperors of Rome garnered increasing authority. So we can see the same things happening now, right? So first they, allowed this system to get put together, and then they started closing in on, the system that got them there, right? With the rise of European monarchs, rhetoric shifted into courtly and religious applications, right? Augustine exerted strong influence on Christian rhetoric in the Middle Ages, advocating the use of rhetoric to lead audiences to truth and understanding, especially in the church. So we know that Augustine was the final nail in the setting up of the Christian system, right? The study of liberal arts, the study of liberal arts, he believed, contributed to rhetorical study. In the case of a keen and adherent nature fine words will come more readily through reading and adhering the eloquent than by pursuing the rules of rhetoric. So, as you know, you become better as a traveling man, per se, somebody out there and really practicing this versus, just sitting around. Pardon me here, I'm trying to just sitting around and taking it in. Right. I didn't like the way it was like stay it right there. Where we at here? Middle Ages, the use of rhetoric, audience, especially in church. The study of liberal arts, he believed, contributed to rhetorical studies. In the case of a keen adherent nature, fine words will come more readily through reading and hearing the eloquent than the pursuing of the rules of rhetoric. Poetry and letter writing became central to rhetorical studies during the Middle Ages. After the fall of the Roman Republic, poetry became the tool for rhetorical training, since there were few opportunities for political speeches. Letter writing was the primary way business was conducted both in state and church, so it became an important aspect of rhetorical education, right? Witty, unpredictable styles, a natural game, right? I had to put that in there. Right, and we're gonna do a whole show on Wu, and understanding, but they did it for the people, so I ain't got nothing against them. Right, they use this system too. Rhetorical education became more restrained as style and substance suspended and separated in 16th century France, right? And as you know, it is here right here. In addition, turned to scientific methods. Influenced scholars like Peter Ramian argued that the process of invention and argument should be elevated to the domain of philosophy, while rhetoric instruction should chiefly concerned with the use of figures and other forms of orientation of language. Scholars such as Francis Bacon developed the study of significant rhetoric, which rejects the elaborate style characteristic of classical orientation. This plain language carried over to John Locke's teachings, which emphasized concrete knowledge and steered away from orientation in speech, further alienating rhetorical instructions, which identified wholly with such orientation from the pursuit of knowledge. So, I had to throw my boys up in there. Right, PE, they used rhetoric. They was associated with the Nation of Islam, right? In the 18th century, rhetoric assumed a more social role, leading to the creation of new education systems, primarily in England. So we see rhetoric 18th century, right? Predominantly in England. Eloquentiation schools in which girls and women analyze classical literature, most notably the works of William Shakespeare, and discuss pronunciation techniques. The study of rhetoric underwent a revival with the rise of democratic institutions during the late 18th and early 19th century. Hugh Blair was a key early leader in this movement. In his most famous work, Literature and on Rhetoric and Belles Lettres, he advocates rhetorical studies for common citizens. as a resource for social success. Many American colleges and secondary schools used Blair's text throughout the 19th century to train students of rhetoric. And that's why you seen that wild time, right? Political rhetoric also underwent renewal in the wake of the U.S. and French revolutions. Now, it's funny how both of them was taking place around the same time. Rhetorical studies of ancient Greece and Rome were reconstructed as speakers and teachers looked at Cicero and others to inspire defenses of the new republic. Leading rhetorical theorists, including John Quincy Adams of Harvard, who advocated that democratic advancements of rhetorical arts. Harvard founding of the Babylonic professorship of rhetoric and oratory speakers, the growth of the study of rhetoric in colleges across the United States. Harvard rhetoric program drew inspiration from library sources to guide organizations in style and studies. The rhetoric uses in political communications to illustrate how political figures persuade audiences. William G. Allen became the first American college professor of rhetoric at New York Central College. This is 1853. Right. Debate clubs and lyceums also developed as forums in which common citizens could hear speakers and sharpen debate skills. The American lyceum was seen as both an educational and social institution, teaching group discussion and guest literatures. These programs cultivated democratic values and promoted active participation in political analysis. Leaders of the new school. Throughout the 20th century, rhetoric developed in a concentrated field of study. Peace, God, peace. Awareness daily. How you doing out there, brother? Good to see you. Right? Concentrated fields of study with the establishment of rhetorical courses in high school and universities. Courses such as public speaking and speech analysis applied fundamentally Greek theories, such as modes of persuasion, ethos, pathos, and logos, and trace rhetorical development through history. Rhetoric earned a more esteemed reputation as a field of study with the emergence of communication studies departments and rhetoric composition programs within English departments and universities, and in conjunction with linguistic turns in Western philosophy. As we know, this philosophy, right, we understand that with the philosopher, the sophists work, right? And so this is how society becomes move, right? Rhetorical studies has broadened in scope and is especially used by the fields of making political, marketing, politics, and literature, right? Now again, remember we was talking symbolisms and these type of things, so remember the 80s and 90s and, their symbolisms, and we can see how, that's taken hold today. Now, mind you, these guys were down with the Dr. York crew, and, they had the same allegations on them, just like Brother Polite. This is how you know that this is all a part of that system, right? Another area of rhetoric is the study of cultural rhetoric, which is the communication that occurs between cultures and the study of the way members of a culture communicate with each other. These ideas can be studied and understood by other cultures. A bridge graph is made and modes of communication and help different cultures communicate effectively with each other. James Zappin defines cultural rhetoric as the idea that rhetoric is concerned with negotiating and listening, not persuasion, which different from ancient definitions. Some ancient rhetorics was disparaging because its persuasive techniques could be used to teach falsehoods. So when we see this woke community and we see how, they can turn around and start pumping out this falsehoods. This is a community that is doing this deliberately. Communications as studied and cultural rhetoric is focused on listening and negotiating and has little to do with persuasion. All right. Then you got, KRS-One, My Philosophy, right? Rhetorical education focuses on 5 canons. 5 canons of rhetoric serves as a guide to creating persuasive messages and arguments. So inside of this is when you start seeing them trapping you up in your words and getting, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, so you black? Well, black is this, and they start breaking down all of this stuff to attack your psyche, right? And so this is this persuasive, message and arguments, right? Inventor or invention. This is number 1, right? The process that leads to development and refinement of an argument. So when we see we're not black, we're natives, and we're not from Africa, and Egypt is right here in America. This is refinement and or of an argument, right? So because they keep adding, the more you argue, the more they take from it and twerk it and fix it to their likings, right? Disposition or arrangement used to determine how an argument should be organized for greater effect, right? Usually beginning with an expedium. So again, right? So now you have your argument, then you figure out the disposition. How are you going to make this convincing, right? Then you got style, determining how to present the argument, right? This style, how you gonna come, right? Then it's memory, the process of learning and memorizing the speech and persuasive messages, right? So now you have all of this information, and now you have to have it on cap, right? Presentation and actal delivery, the gestures, pronunciations, tones and pace used when presenting a persuasive argument, the grand style. So when we see the Masonic and they telling you, the grand hell sign and all of this, these are things showing you how to make these speeches and to it trigger an association within the minds of those who are observing it, right? Because this is a continued thing. It's like a never ending story. Right. Memory was added much later to the original 4 courses. So, the last memory over here, right? You see that was added later. But nonetheless, right. So now you understand the master liar, he must design the lie, and they're training how to design the lie in its most appropriate form. This is like training on how to be a great liar, right? With the help of people that's gonna co-sign, your BS, right? During the Renaissance, rhetoric enjoyed a resurgence, and as a result, nearly every author who wrote about music before the Romantic era discussed rhetoric. Joachim Bernister wrote in 1601, "There is only little difference between music and the nature of orientation." Christopher Bernard, in a latter half of the century, said, "Until the art of music has attained such a height in our own day that it may indeed be compared to the rhetoric in view of the multitude of figures," right? And so let's look at what Nas said. Well, Lauryn Hill sung this verse, but let's analyze this verse in If I Ruled the World, right? It says, "If I ruled the world, imagine that. I'd freed all my sons." Take out the all in that, and you got I free my sons, free my sons, free my sons. I'd be a Freemason. I love them, baby. Black diamonds and pearls, could it be? If it could be mine, we both shine. If I ruled the world, still living in these last days and times. Let me go through that one more time, right? If we analyze Nas's verse, right? If I ruled the world, imagine that. I'd freed all my sons. I free my sons, Freemasons. I love them, baby. Black diamonds and pearls, could it be? You could be mine. We both shine. If I ruled the world, still living in these last days. Matter of fact, I'm gonna make that in one of those shorts. I'm gonna use this right here, right? But as you see, the art form, right, is there. Being able to implement these things within it, and nobody being able to recognize it, is an art form, right? As you know, etymology and rhetoric has been compared to one another for decades, but the specifications of their similarities have gone undefined. Since scholar Robert L. Scott stated that rhetoric is epidemic, right? Rhetoricians and philosophers alike have struggled to correctly define the expanse of implication these words hold. Those who have identified this inconsistency maintain the idea that Scott's relation is important but requires further studies. You see my boy Lupe Fiasco there. Etymology. Now, the theory of knowledge, especially regarding its methods, validity, and scope. Etymology is the investigation of what distinguishes epistemiologist, right? Epistemology, right? It goes justification, belief from opinion, right? And so with their member, they're building something. What is Freemasons building? They're building belief, opinions, right? They're building a world that you see around you and how you perceive it. Right? The root of the issue lies in the ambiguous use of the term rhetoric itself, as well as the etymological term knowledge, containing the truth through counterintuitive and vague Scott claims are accepted by some academics, but are then used to draw different conclusions. So Sonja K. False, for example, takes the view that rhetoric creates knowledge, whereas James Hedrick writes, rhetoric asserts in people's ability to form belief, which are defined as knowledge once they become spread in the community. That's why I used, all of these, these albums, right? Says rhetoric creates knowledge. Okay. Then he says, but then, the response to that was James Henrick, right? Which I agree with. Rhetoric asserts in people's ability to form beliefs, which are defined as knowledge once they become widespread in the community. Right? It is unclear whether Scott holds that certainty is an inherent part of establishing knowledge. His reference to the term abstract. He is not the only one, as the debate's persistence in philosophical circles long predates his addition of rhetoric. There is an overwhelming majority that does support the concept of certainty as a requirement for knowledge, but at the definition of certainty where parties begin to diverge. One definition maintains that certainty is subjective and feeling based. The other that it is byproduct of justification. The more commonly accepted definition of rhetoric claims it is synonymous with persuasion. For rhetoric proposes this definition, like many others. It is too broad. The same issue presents itself with definitions that are too narrow. Rhetoricians in support of the epistemic view of rhetorics have yet to agree in this regard. Philosophical teachings refer to knowledge as a justified true belief. However, the G.O.D problem explores the room for fallacies in this concept. Therefore, the G.O.D problem impedes the effectivity of the argument of Richard A. Chiswitz and James A. Hickens, who employ the justified true belief standpoint in their argument for rhetoric as epidemic. Celeste Condent rails back takes a different approach, drawing from Ray E. McCreary's system of belief based on validity rather than certainty. Justified true belief, JTB, is a definition of knowledge that implies that a belief is knowledge if it is true and there are reasonable and necessary assertions to justify it. This definition has been discussed since ancient Greek philosophy, especially by Plato. Justification is a property of belief that makes them more likely to be true, but by providing persons in favor of the truth of the belief, right? It goes by providing reasons, by providing reasons in favor of the truth of the belief, right? Or it goes, William D. Harpins refers to the issue of unclear definitions that occur in the theories of rhetoric is epidemic. In his 2004 article, What Do You Mean Rhetoric is Epidemic? In it, he focuses on uncovering the most appropriate definition for the term rhetoric, knowledge, and certainty. According to Harpin, certainty is either objective or subjective. Although both Scott and Chaswitz and Hickens' theories deal with some form of certainty, Harkins believes that knowledge is not required to be neither objective or subjectively certain. In terms of rhetoric, Harkins argues that the definition of rhetoric as the art of persuasion is the best choice in the context of this theoretical approach of rhetoric as epidemic, right? Hopkins then proceeds to present two methods of approaching the idea of rhetoric as epistemic, and I know I'm saying it wrong, epistemic, right? Based on the definition presented. One centers on Alliston's views that one's beliefs are justified and formed by one's normal dialectic, while the other focuses on the causal theory of knowledge. Both approaches managed to avoid Gideon's problem and do not rely on unclear conceptions of certainty. Right. Right. In a discussion of rhetoric and epistemology comes the question of ethics. Is it ethical for rhetoric to present itself in the branch of knowledge? Scott rears this question, addressing the issue not with ambiguity and the definition of other terms, but against subjectivity regarding certainty. Ultimately, according to Thomas O. Sloan, rhetoric and epistemology exist as counterparts, working towards the same purpose of establishing knowledge with the common enemy of subjective certainty. right? So they both got one enemy, subjective certainty. Like, I'm not sure, right? Just to be questioning makes them, their enemy, because they need you to take this information in and accept it as a new belief. As belief is psychologically certain when the subject who has it is supremely convinced it is true. Certainty is in this series is similar to incorrigibility, which is the property a belief has of being such that the subject is incapable of giving it up. Like, no matter how much you can show them the truth and something, they're incapable of giving it up because it's a part of their mental psyche now. Their world would collapse if they gave it up. Rhetoric is a persuasive speech that holds people to a common purpose and therefore facilitates collective action. During the 5th century BCE, Athens became an active metropolis. During this time, the Greek city-states had been experimenting, remember I said, with the new form of government, democracy. Demos, the people, political, cultural identity has been tied to the city's area. The citizens of Athens formed institutions, the Senate, jury, trials, in forms of public discussion, but people needed to learn how to navigate these new institutions with no form of passing on information other than word of mouth. The Athenians needed an effective strategy to inform the people, right? So this was like your first form of advertising, right? Rhetoric in this style. When you learn the art, you'll understand, like, oh, I see how it works. A group of wandering Sicilians, later known as Sophists, the Sophists, began teaching the Athenians persuasive speech with the goal of navigating the course of Senate, the courts and Senate. The Sophists became speech teachers known as Sophia, Greek for wisdom. We did a whole show on the Sophists, right? The Sophists came to the common term of someone who sold wisdom for money. Right, so we can look at all of the woke community, right? Although there is no clear understanding why the Sicilian engaged in education of Athens' persuasive speech, because this was all in a design. It is known that the Athenians did indeed rely on persuasive speech more during public speak and for new public processes, also including the sophist training leading to many victories for legal cases, public debates, and even simple persuasive speech. What? Simple persuasive speech. This ultimately led to concerns rising on falsehoods over truth with highly trained persuasive speakers knowingly misinforming. What is that? This ultimately led to concerns rising on falsehoods over truth, with highly trained persuasive speakers knowingly misinforming. Rhetoric has its origins in Mesopotamia. Some of the earliest examples of rhetoric can be found in academian writings of the princess and the priestess and Shania. I did a show on, I can't say her name correctly, but as the first named author in history, right? Writings exhibited numerous, pardon me, right? Numerous rhetorical features that would later become canon in ancient Greece. At Shanidia, the exaltation of Anan includes an extradidium argument and pre-ordination, as well as elements of ethos, pathos, and logos, and repetition and metonymy, right? She is also known for describing her process of invention and the exaltation of Inan, moving between first and third person address to relate her composing process and collaboration with the goddess Inan, inflicting a mystical etheme and drawing upon a cosmic audience, right? So she basically used the information of the stars, right? What the scientists were doing, and that's how, she built, that system. If she's, and in mind, it was debated on whether or not she's actually, because she was the daughter of the king, so it's debatable of whether or not she was actually the author, right? They just had to throw that in there, right? Later examples on early rhetoric can be found in Neo-Assyrian Empire during the time of Sennacherib, right? And this is 704 681, right? In ancient Egypt, rhetoric had existed since at least the Middle Kingdom period. This is 2080 to 1640 BCE, right? The 5 canons of eloquence in ancient Egypt rhetorics were silence, timing, restraint, fluency, and truthfulness, right? So this is why we understand the new system, which is based on just the lies. This is where we get the satanic system from, right? Because one, at least, it required you to be silent when it was required to be silent, right? So when you spoke was important. What you didn't say, was important. How you said it was important, in the fact that it was true, right? The Egyptians held eloquent speaking in high esteem. Egyptian rulers of rhetoric specified that knowing when not to speak is essential and very respected. Rhetorical knowledge making rhetoric a branch between eloquence and wise silence. They also emphasize adherence to social behavior that supports a conservative status quo, and they held that skilled speakers should support, not question, society. Right, so it should support the way the society is going instead of always going against the grain, right? So it was more submissive. That's the good thing about this rhetoric. It allows you to be, step out the box. Right? In ancient China, rhetoric dates to the Chinese philosopher Confucius, 551 479 BCE. The traditions of Confucianism emphasizes the use of eloquence and speaking. The use of rhetoric can also be found in ancient biblical traditions. The pointing, This is the Masonic. You'll see a lot of them do that. You won't notice that, but yes, it's for, the art of speech. Comedians, some of the main movers and shakers of our society, right? I remember when they used to say, if a woman was, president or this, that, and the third, and you can see that they were doing a promotion to place it inside the minds of the people, right? In Europe, organized thought about public speaking began in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, the earliest mention of oratorical skills occurred in Homer's Iliad, in which heroes like Achilles, Hector, and Odious were honored for their ability to advise and exert their peers and followers. The Laos or army to wise and appropriate actions. With the rise of the democratic polis, speaking skills was adapted to the need of the public and political life of cities in ancient Greece. Greek citizens used oratory to make political and judicial decisions and to develop and disseminate philosophical ideas. Right? For modern students, it can be difficult to remember that the wide use and availability of writing text is a phenomenon that was just coming into vogue in classical Greece. So before then, the writing was limited to just certain people. That was and always has been a part of the magic, right? And we'll get into that, right? This being able to control the mind just by the written word, right? In classical times, many of the great thinkers and political leaders perform their works before an audience, usually in the context of a competition or contest for fame, political influence, and cultural capital. In fact, many of them are known only through the text that their students, followers, and distractors wrote down. Rhetor was a Greek term for orator, and a orator, right, was a citizen who regularly addressed juries and political assemblies, and who was thus understood to have gained some knowledge about political speaking or public speaking and the process. Though in general, faculty with language was often referred to as logon technique, skill with arguments or verbal artistry. And I've always was told I have verbal artistry. You know what I'm saying? I've always had, that. Since a child, I've always, had that ability. I'll crush you. I'll crush you verbally. I'll crush you physically, but I'll crush you verbally. I'll destroy you. You know what I'm saying? There's in a verbal joust. There's very few who can hold their own. Right? Possibly the first study about the power of language may be attributed to the philosopher Empedocles. Right? This is 444 BCE. Right? Maybe that's where Jay-Z got it from. Whose theories on human knowledge would provide a basis for many future rhetoricians. The first writing manual is attributed to Corax and his pupil Tisias. Their works, as well as that of many of early rhetoricians, grew out of the court of law. Tisias, as example, is believed to have written judicial speeches that others delivered in the courts. Right? Rhetoric evolved as an important art that provides the orator with forms, means, and strategies for persuading an audience for the correctness of an orator's argument. Right? So for any argument, any situation, they're trained in this. Today's term rhetoric can be used at times to refer only to the forms of argumentation, often with pejorative connotations that rhetoric is a means of obscuring the truth. Classical philosophers believe quite the contrary. The skilled use of rhetoric was essentially to the discovery of truth because it provided the means of ordering and clarifying arguments. Right? Meaning that basically while you're lying to somebody, it forces them to go and find the truth, because you be lying to her, they're like, wait a minute, that shit don't add up. You know what I'm saying? So that's what brings about this. Oh, by the way, don't forget to hit the like, the subscribe, and the notification bell so you can be notified whenever we go live or we upload new content just like now. Right? This is Esoteric Daydreams, right? The Awakening, where if you thought the nightmare was scary, wait till you get a load of the daydream, right? And don't forget, check out my book, Street Skelzy, Knock 'em Out the Box, available now on Amazon Books, as well as my other book, Freemasonry and Johnny Worship, the Second Killing of Jesus, right? Where they use these tactics right here to persuade you to leave one system and join under the new system, which you was really under anyway, but it's training your brain to accept the new system, right? Teaching in oratory was popularized in the 5th century BCE by Latitian teachers known as sophists, the best known of whom were Pythagoras. You need to learn about Pythagoras, trust me. Gorgias and Aristocrat, right? Asphion of Melutius is believed to be one of the first women to engage in private and public rhetorical activities as a sophist. So yes, women can be sophists. That would be the first one. That's why I threw the hover up inside. There's no offense to Living Color and the Keenan family, Wayne's family. I mess with them how a body, right? Where we at? Women engaged in private. The sophists were a desperate group who disparate group who traveled from city to city teaching in public places to attract students and offer them an education. Their central focus was on logos, or what we might broadly refer to as discourse. Its functions and powers. They defined parts of speech, analyzed poetry, parsed close synonyms, invented argumentation strategies, and debated the nature of reality. The claims to make their students better, or in other words, to teach virtue, they does claim that human excellence was not accident, the first of the progressive and noble births, but an art of Techian that could be taught and learned. They were thus among the first humanists. Right, so they were saying they can teach you this skill of deception, right? But first, you got to get down and be deceived, right? Okay, several sophists also questioned, received wisdom about the gods in the Greek culture, which believed was taken for granted by Greeks in their time, making these sophists among the first agnostics. For example, they argued that cultural practices were a function of convention or nomos rather than blood or birth or filius, right? They argued further that morality or immorality of any action could not be judged outside the cultural context which it occurs. As well known phrase, a man is a measure of all things, arise from this belief. So, in saying this is in the court of law, this is, like, for me, one of the things I say, like when Tupac said, like being in jail and how could you judge me? You don't know me and you never love. Meaning, you are not a part of the culture to understand what is being promoted within that culture to handle certain situations. So if, in the European culture, you might be in, and we're on the same land, but still there's different worlds within this melting pot, right? And so, one promotion on how you handle things is different than the promotion on how you handle things, even within the situation, right? Because you could be black, but you not inside, like say the gang culture, which feels you handle things in a certain way, and the citizens, just basically, victims to it unless they decide they're gonna handle it, themselves too, and then we wind up, in bad situations. Right? I know, trust me. One of the sophists' most famous and infamous doctrines has to do with probability and counter arguments. They taught that every argument could be countered with an opposing argument, that an argument effectiveness derived from how likely it appeared to the audience, its probability of seeming true. Just seeming true. It is that any probability argument could be countered with an invented probability argument. Thus, it seemed likely that a strong poor man were guilty of robbing a rich weak man. The stronger poor man could argue on the contrary, that this very likelihood that he would be a suspect makes it unlikely that he committed the crime, since he would most likely be apprehended for the crime. They also taught and were known for the ability to make a weaker or worse argument the stronger or better, right? Astrophenians famously parodies the clever inversions that sophists were known for their play, The Clouds. Right? The great debater. The word sophist developed negative connotation in ancient Greece that continues today. Yeah, the Freemasons. So this is that, part of this negative connotation, because not only did they, take this, but like as we saw with torture, and there's many different ways of this persuasion. So as long as they're persuading you towards the main goal, then I guess they all support it. As long as you push them towards what they want the goal to be. Right, ancient Greece continues today. But in ancient Greek, sophists were nevertheless popular and well-paid professionals, respected for their ability, but also criticized for their excesses. Right, these are just different movies, and shows, different stuff. Illicit Kid, right, for 36 to 338 BCE, like the Sophists, taught public speaking as a means of human improvement. But he worked on distinguishing himself from the Sophists, whom he saw as claiming far more than any could deliver. They were liars, right? He suggested that while the art of virtue or excellence did exist, it was only one piece, and the least in the process of self-improvement that relied much more on native talent, desires, constant practice, and the imitation of good models. Illicit Cat believed that practice in speaking publicly about noble themes and important questions would improve the character of both speaker and audience, while also offering the best service to a city. So he was trying to be a righteous man, right? Illicit was an outspoken champion of rhetoric as a mode of civic engagement. He thus wrote his speeches as models for his students to imitate, in the same way that poets might imitate Homer or Hesiod, seeking to inspire in them a desire to obtain fame through civic leadership. He was the first prominent school in Athens, and it is likely that Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum were founded in part as a response to Isocrates. Though he left no handbook, his speeches, right, Antidodians and against the Sophists, are most relevant to students of rhetoric. Become models or of auditory and keys in his entire educational program. He was one of the canonical 10 Attic orators. He influenced Cicero and Quintin, and through them, the entire education system of the West. Let that sink in. Plato, 427 through 347 BCE, outlined the difference between the true and false rhetoric in a number of dialogues, particularly the Gorgias and Phereidus dialogues, in which Plato disputes the sophist's notion that the art of persuasion, the sophist's art, which he called rhetoric, can exist independently of the art of dialect. Plato claims that since sophists appealed only to what seemed probable, they are not advancing their students and audience, but simply flattering them with what they want to hear. While Plato's condemnation of rhetoric is clear in the Gorgias and the Philistius, he suggests the probability of a true art within rhetoric is based upon the knowledge produced by dialect. He relies on the dialectical informed rhetoric to appeal to the main character. Phidias to take up philosophy. Thus, Plato's rhetoric is actually dialectic or philosophy turned towards those who are not yet philosophers and are thus unready to pursue dialectic directly. Plato's immunity against rhetoric and against the sophists derive not only from their inflated claims to teach virtue and their reliance on appearance, but from the fact that his teacher Socrates was sentenced to death after sophist efforts, right? They got Socrates killed. Right, so he was like, "Nah, I ain't messing with these dudes." Right. Some scholars, however, see Plato not as an apparent opponent of rhetoric, but rather as a nuanced rhetorical theorist who dramatized rhetorical practices in his dialogues and imagine rhetoric as more than just auditory, because it is just more than auditory. Right, Aristotle, this is 384 to 322 BCE, was a student of Plato who set forth an extended treatise on rhetoric that still repays careful study today. In the first sentence of The Art of Rhetoric, Aristotle says that rhetoric is the anti-strophist of dialect, right? The oratorphist of a Greek ode responds to and is patterned after the structure of the strophe. They form two sections of the whole and are snug by two paths of chaos. So the art of rhetoric follows. It is structurally patterned after the art of dialect because both the arts of discourse produce production. While dialectical methods are necessary to find truth in theoretical matters, rhetorical methods are required in practical matters such as educating somebody's guilt or innocence when charged in a court of law, or educating a prudent cause of action to be taken in a deliberative assembly. For Plato and Aristotle, dialectics involves persuasion. So when Aristotle says that rhetoric is an antitroph of dialect, he means that rhetoric is, as he uses the term, has a domain or scope of application that is parallel to but different from the domain or scope of application of dialect. Claude Previous explains that the Greek prefix anti does not merely designate opposition, but it can also mean in place of. Right? Aristotle's treatise on rhetoric systematically describes civic rhetoric as a human art or skill, technique. It is more of an objective theory clarification needed, my fault. Then it is on interpretive theory within rhetoric and tradition. Aristotle's art of rhetoric emphasizes persuasion as a purpose of rhetoric. In his definition of rhetoric as a faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion, essentially a model of discourse of discovery, limits the art of inventional processes. Aristotle emphasizes the logical aspect of this process. A speaker supports the probability of a message by logically ethical and emotional proofs. Aristotle identifies 3 steps of office of rhetoric: invention, arrangement, and style, and 3 different types of rhetorical proof. What are these 3 proofs? Ethos, Aristotle's theory of character and how the character and credibility of a speaker can influence an audience to consider him or her to be believable. There being 3 qualities that contribute to a credible ethos: perceived intelligence, various character, and goodwill. Pathos, the use of emotional appeal to alter the audience judgment through metaphor. Amplification, storytelling, or presenting the topic in a way that evokes strong emotion in an audience. Logos, the use of reasoning, either inductive or deductive, to construct an argument. Aristotle emphasizes etymological reasoning and central to the process of rhetorical invention. Through later rhetoric and theorists place much less emphasis on it. And etheme follows the form of a syllogism. However, it excludes either the major or minor premise. An etheme is persuasive because the audience provides the missing premise. Because the audience participates in providing the missing premise, they are more likely to be persuaded by the message. All right, so forgive me if you see me using these memes. I'm not here trying to persuade you, but I am trying to provide you with the proof through, these pictures and stuff. All right. Aristotle identifies 3 different types or genres of civil rhetoric. Forensic, also known as judicial, right? Concerns with determining the truth or falsehoods of events that took place in the past in issues of guilt, for example, in a courtroom. So you see my boy Johnny Cochran there, right? Deliberative, also known as political. Concerned with determining whether actions should or should not be taken in the future, for example, making laws. You see your boy Obama there, right? Epistemic, also known as ceremonial, concerned with praise and blame, values, rights and wrong. Determining beauty and skills in the present, for example, a eulogy or a wedding feast. Toast, my fault. But you see right here, right, we got your boy Farrakhan, right? So the white shadow, my fault, not the white shadow. In turn, in the 20th century, right? there was a revival of rhetorical studies manifested in the establishment of departments of rhetoric and speech at academic institutions, as well as the formation of national and international professional organization. The early interest in rhetorical studies was a movement away from a lexicon as toward an English departments in the United States in an attempt to refocus rhetorical studies from delivery only to civic engagement in a rich complexity of the nature of rhetoric. Right? By the 1930s, advances in mass media technology led to the revival of the study of rhetoric, language, persuasion, and political rhetoric and its consequences. The linguistics term in philosophy also contributed in this revival, and the term rhetoric came to be applied to media forms other than verbal language, e.g., visual rhetoric, temporal rhetoric, and temporal turn in rhetorical theory and practice. The rise of advertising and mass media such as photography, telegraph, radio, film brought rhetoric more prominently into people's lives. The discipline of rhetoric has been used to study how advertising persuades and to help understand the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories on social media, right? As just like I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? I'm past theorizing, right? I go out and I go search, right? I'm a philosopher, so I find the truth, right? Rhetoric can be analyzed by a variety of methods as theories, such as methods as one such method is criticism. When those using criticism analyzes instances of rhetoric, what they do is called rhetorical criticism. See criticism. According to rhetorical criticism, Jim A. Kuyper's, the use of rhetoric is an art, and as such, it does not lend itself well to scientific methods of analysis. Criticism is an art as well, and as such is particularly well suited for examining rhetorical creations. So criticizing them is how you get at them. He asserts that criticism is a method of generating knowledge that as the scientific method is a method of generating knowledge, right? Questioning, digging into it, getting down to the nitty gritty. The way the sciences and the humanities study the phenomena that surrounds us differs greatly, and the amount of research personalities allow to influence the results of the study. It says what? The way sciences and the humanities study the phenomena that surrounds us differs greatly, and the amount of research personalities allow to influence the result of the study. For example, in the sciences, researchers purposefully adhere to a strict method, the scientific method. Generally speaking, the researcher's personality, likes and dislikes, and religious and political preferences are supposed to be as far removed as possible from the actual study. Right, so the people who studying it and the people who they are calling in, so this is why they need you as a Freemason to be a believer in these things, because then they can study you. Right, so you're just a science experiment too. Those who's walking into that lodge, you were just the first to be experimented on. Right, like Frankenstein, and then you go out to the world and give that information to us, or a zombie trying to, steal our brains with your newfound information. In sharp contrast, criticism, one of many humanistic methods of generating knowledge, actively involves the personality of the researcher. The very choices of what to study and how and why to study is rhetorical artifacts are heavily influenced by the personal qualities of the researcher. In the humanities, methods of research may also take many forms. Criticism, ethnograph, for example, but the personality of the researcher is an integral integral component of the study. Further personalizing criticism, we find that rhetorical critics use a variety of means when examining a particular rhetorical artifact, with some critics even developing their own unique perspective to better examine the rhetorical artifact. Edward Black wrote on this point that methods then admits a varying degree of personalities, and criticism on the whole is near the indigenate contingent personal end of the methodological scale. In consequence, on displacement, it is neither possible nor desirable for criticism to be fixed into a system, for critical techniques to be objectified, for critics to be interchangeable, for proposing of replication, or for rhetorical criticism to serve as a handmaiden for quasi-scientific theory. Kuiper sums this idea of criticism as an art in the following manner. In short, criticism is an art, not a science. It is not a scientific method. It uses subjective methods of argument. It exists on its own, not in conjunction with other methods of generating knowledge, i.e., social scientific or scientific insight and imagination, top statistical applications when studying rhetorical actions. Insight and imagination, right? Rhetorical strategies are the efforts made by authors or speakers to persuade or inform their audience. According to James W. Gray, importance, right? There are various argument strategies used in writing. He described 4 of these arguments from analogy, right? Argument, absurdity through experiment, and influence and inference to the best explanation. Right? Models of rhetorical criticisms explore the relationship between text and context. That is, how an instance for rhetorical relates to criticism, since the aim of rhetoric is to be persuasive. The level into which the rhetoric is in question persuades its audience is what must be analyzed and later criticized. In determining the extent to which the text is persuasive, one may explore the text's relation with its audience, purpose, ethics, arguments, evidence, arrangements, delivery, and style. In his rhetorical criticism, the study and method, Edward Black states, it is the task of criticism not to measure discourse dogmatically against some parasitical prorochical standard of rationality, but allowing for the immeasurable wide range of human experience to see them as they really are, while as they really are is debatable. Rhetorical critics explain text and speeches by investigating their rhetorical situation, typically place them in a framework of speaker audience exchange, right? An anti-theoretical view places the rhetoric, right, at the center of creating that which is considered the extent situation, i.e., the agreed agenda and spin, right? So they're the creators. What it says right here, it says, I'm typically placing them in a framework of speaker audience exchange. The antithetical view places the real orator at the center in creating that which is considered the extent situation, i.e., the agenda and spin. Following the neo-Aristotelian approach to criticism, scholars began to derive methods from which disciplines such as history, philosophy, and social science. The importance of critics' personally judgment decreases and explicit courage clarification needed. My fault. While the analytical dimensions of criticism began to gain momentum throughout the 1960s and 1970s, methodological pluralism replaced the singular neo-Australian methods. Methodological rhetoric and criticism is typically done by deduction, in which a broad method, vague, is used to examine a specific case of rhetoric. These types clarification needed includes, right? Dialectical criticism engages rhetoric as it suggests the belief, values, assumption, and interpretation held by the orator and the larger cultural ideological criticism also treats ideology as an artifact of discourse, that is embedded in key terms called diagraphs, as well as mutual resources in discovious embodiment. Cluster criticism seeks to help the critic understand the orator's worldview, development developed by Kenneth Burke. This means identifying terms that cluster around key symbols in the rhetorical artifact and the patterns in which they appear. Frame analysis looks for how orators conduct an interpretive lens in their discourse. In short, how they make certain facts more noticeably than others. It is particularly useful for analyzing products in the news media. Genre criticism, right, assumes certain situations call for similar needed expectations within the audience, therefore calls for certain types of rhetorical studies, rhetoricalist studies, rhetoric in different times and locations, looking at similarities in the rhetorical situation and the rhetoric that responds to them. Examples include eulogies, inaugural addresses, and declarations of war. Narrative criticism. Narratives helps organize experience in order to endow meaning in historical events, and transformation narrative criticism focus on the story itself and how construction of its narrative directs the interpretation of the situation. So as we hear words like construct and build, we understand Freemasonry, right? By the end of the 1980s, the study of rhetorical criticism began to move away from precise methodology towards conceptual issues. Conceptual driven criticism operates more through abduction, according to scholar James Jasinski, right, who argues that this type of criticism can be thought of as a back and forth between text and its concept and the concepts specify, right, which are being explored at the same time. The concepts remain works in progress. In addressing these terms developed through the analysis of the text. Right. Criticism is considered rhetorical when it focuses on the way types of discourse react to situational existence, right? Problems or demands and constraints. Modern rhetorical criticism concerns how the rhetorical case or object persuades, defines, or constructs the audience. In modern terms, rhetoric includes, but is not limited to, speeches, scientific discourse, pamphlets, literary works, works of art, and pictures. Right? Contemporary rhetorical criticism has maintained aspects of early neo-Aristotelian thinking through close reading, which attempts to explore the organization and stylistic structure of rhetorical object. Using close textual analysis means rhetorical critics use the tools of classical rhetoric and literary analysis to evaluate the style and strategy used to communicate the argument. Rhetorical criticism serves several purposes. For one, it hopes to help form or improve public taste. It helps educate audiences and develops them to better judges better judges in rhetorical situations by reinforcing ideas of value, morality, and suitability. Rhetorical criticism can thus contribute to the audience understanding themselves in society. According to Jim Campion, a second purpose for performing criticism should be enhanced. It should be enhance our apprehension, my fault. Appreciation and understanding, right? Okay, according to Jim A. Kuipers, a second purpose for performing criticism should be to enhance our appreciation and understanding. We wish to enhance both our and others' understanding of rhetorical act. We wish to share our insight with others and to encourage their apprehension of the rhetorical act. These are not hollow goals, but quality of life issues. By improving understanding and apprehension, the critic can offer new and potentially exciting ways for others to see the world. Through understanding, we also produce knowledge about human communication and theory. This should help us better govern or govern our interactions with others. Criticism is a humanizing activity, and that it explores the highlight qualities that make us human. I hope you gain some knowledge in how or what Freemasonry is, or what the Freemason is doing. Right? The Freemason is using rhetoric, these slick talking ways, these fast words, right? This style, this catering to what you want to believe in a system that they already created for you anyway. So the things you believe are not your own. Now, the things that are not your own, they are able to utilize against you even further. Right? And so this is what rhetoric is. This is what Freemasonry is. How it works, we will be getting into, but this is the art. This is what's really happening. Right? And so there's a world being built inside here, which you believe. That's why this show is called Esoteric Daydreams. Right? So it's while you are awake, you are still dreaming. You are dreaming through the form of belief. What you believe motivates you, operates you, and keeps you going. So those who construct belief control you. You are not sovereign because you are not aware of this system bombarding you and using it against you. There are very few who are capable of understanding this. Right? Don't forget to hit the like, the subscribe, and the notification bell so you could be notified whenever we go live or new content is uploaded, like now. Right? So until next time, hold it down and remember, man, the dream, man, the nightmare ain't got nothing on the daydream, right? The nightmare was, the Abrahamic system, right? I mean, the daydream is the satanic system that's being set up in front of you right now with Freemasonry, because man, they have done some wicked deeds in order for this to take shape and form. All right, so until next time, man, hold it down. I'm Juice Wonder. This is Esoteric Daydreams, the awakening.